Welcome to Module 204A. Once we are familiar with the different types of drawings that we have, we can move on to looking at how those drawings are organized and the symbologies that are used within them. We should already be able to recognize a number of the different symbols that are on these charts already. However, I will be dealing with certain specific symbols that we will be looking at as we go through our motor controls. Firstly, we should all know by now what a push button looks like and what a push button does. The one thing that we need to understand is that the contacts on the push button are actually interchangeable. Whereas the push button itself is just a mechanical device, we can change the contacts on the back to be either normally open, normally closed, or we can even stack them together to have multiple different types of contacts, creating a normally open and a normally closed interlocked button. Pressure switches and vacuum switches can be found on a number of different types of systems, including our furnaces as well as any air compressors or water pressure systems. So we should be able to visually recognize what a pressure switch or a vacuum switch is, and we should also understand that these can come in either a normally open or normally closed orientation as well. Some vacuum and pressure switches can have multiple contacts on the inside, making them normally open and normally closed. For our contactors and our relays, we need to understand, firstly, that the coil itself and the contacts associated with that coil are all part of the same unit, where the coil is actuating an armature on the inside, and that armature is opening and closing the contacts. So when I see these symbols, I have to understand that these symbols actually form the same part of one piece of equipment. The magnetic coil and the normally open and the normally closed contacts will all be found together on the same piece of equipment. I should also understand the difference between a control relay and a magnetic coil. A control relay, like you see on the top left of the screen, is a normal everyday relay that we would use for switching circuits. However, my magnetic coil is usually what I use to control motor loads specifically, and we will be getting into motor loads later on in the course. Limit switches and proximity switches normally form parts of larger machines. However, in order to troubleshoot and repair these machines, we need to be able to understand them and recognize them. A limit switch is a mechanical switch that is going to be activated whenever something presses up against it, such as a piece of wood inside a router, for example, could automatically reverse the direction of the machine. Whereas a proximity switch is an electronic switch that is going to sense the nearness of an object or be able to count an object passing by it using either inductive or capacitive theory. With our motor control circuits, we need to be able to understand these three different symbols as well, where we have a 3-pole circuit breaker, and so that is my circuit interrupter. It's also my first overload device for my motor controls. I also have a 3-pole disconnect, so it's going to show 3 interlocked normally open switches in order to disconnect all 3 lines at the exact same time. So that is a manual switching device. And lastly, we have our overload heater, which forms part of our motor contactor and interrupts the motor circuit in case of an overload condition. When it comes to using these symbols inside a schematic diagram, we need to be able to recognize each symbol as it sits in the diagram, and we're going to use the same drawing standards on each and every single one. Firstly, all my rungs are labeled by numbers, so I will have rung 1, rung 2, rung 3. In this drawing, I have all the way up to rung number 9. On the right-hand side of my drawing, I also have a set of numbers that tells me what the relationship is between each rung. So every rung that has a coil on it, and we can see the coils being labeled A, T, D, B, C, and M, each of those relays will have a contact somewhere else, and the right-hand side tells me which rung I can find the associated contact with. For example, contactor A has a set of contacts in line 2, and if I look at line 2, I can see a normally closed set of contacts with the label A. I should be always able to associate the coil and the contacts together both by labeling and by the numbering system on the right-hand side. I also always want to make sure all my control components are on my left-hand side and all my power components or my loads are on my right-hand side. The only exception to that is my overload contact, which you will see in rung 7. In rung 7, right behind coil M, we see a normally closed contact, and that is an overload contact, and the overload contacts are normally found between the coil itself and line 2. You have now reached the end of this objective.
Review your module, complete the knowledge check, and then continue on to the next video.